Hey folks, my name is Suds.
And I'm Nikki. Welcome to Zero Calorie Marketing.
Tune in to listen to us speaking to some of the most innovative, brilliant, open-minded marketers we know.
Each episode features a different marketeer with a unique perspective on marketing, branding, life philosophy, and everything in between.
Lend us your eyes and ears for the next hour or so as we discover more about the person and also the unique path that they took which led them to where they got to.
And the real story behind the why, where, when, and how they do what they do.
Without a further ado, let's get to it.
Hi, and welcome to episode 4 of Zero Calorie Marketing, the podcast. I'm Nikki, your host, who's in leafy Hertfordshire, Suds would say, and Suds is in Sireny, London. And today we're joined by Mark Johnstone, who is formerly VP Creative at Distilled, where he built one of the most successful, well-known content teams in SEO industry. He currently is founder of Content Hubble, a space to explore content ideas, which launched in June of 2020. Hi, Mark.
Hello, how you doing?
Not bad. How are you? How's your day been?
Yeah, good. Just getting wrapped up before Christmas, trying to clear the to-do list in the inbox so we can go away on holiday. All good.
Yeah, I don't think an empty inbox is going to be the dream, but I don't think it's going to be the reality by the time we get to Christmas. I feel like everyone's suddenly in a panic and sending so many emails the last few
That's it.
days.
And they keep coming back. That's the problem.
I know.
They keep replying. No, it's with you. No, it's with you. Just close it and don't look anymore.
I know, my best ones are where you send one and you see an out of office and you're like, oh, thank you.
Yeah.
You know, what I've been doing is doing the schedule send. So I send the reply, but I strategically send it like really the next day, just so it seems like, okay, this is the conclusion of it. So, and even if they do reply, it's going to be on a Sunday or a weekend. So there's less pressure for me to actually respond to it. So yeah, top tip. Thank you so much, Mark, for joining us. I know that you are a man in much demand and you're a busy man overall. And I guess this is probably the last kind of thing that you're going to do before the end of or the start of your holidays. Or is it?
Yeah, maybe 1 or 2 days early next week, just clearing up a little bit more. But yeah, I'm on the wind down now for sure.
Awesome, much needed. I just love everyone to know Mark is like going to work out in some way or form after this, and putting us all to shame. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, I love that you're still like pushing forward where everyone's just like, oh my God, Christmas, I can now open the wines and the cheeses and sit in front of the TV and not move. Well,
that's about to happen. I've got a sort of remote Zoom party with some of my friends. We'll probably have a few drinks on that. And I just thought, you know what, before I do that, if you go for a little workout beforehand, then it's all guilt-free. So that's the aim.
Yes, we love a bit of guilt-free. Now let's just jump into the conversation. So you launched Content Hubble in 2020, in June 2020, which sounds ridiculous given what 2020 is, because I think there was so much uncertainty this year. So for you to make that step to say, I'm actually going to put this out there is amazing. So what pushed you to say, I'm going to launch it this year? What did you see that made you think, yeah, let's go for it?
Yeah, I mean, it's something I had ticking along in the background for quite a long time. There was a conference I was speaking at in June, I think it was, called Outreach, which is a conference mostly for digital PRs and people in SEO who are doing link building, creating content that they want to get a lot of attention online, whether that's links or PR attention or whatever it is. And I was speaking at that, and I knew that's really the kind of world that I operate in, creating content that gets that kind of attention. So this conference was really filled with kind of my people, the people I wanted to be speaking to. And I knew that I was going to be launching the site soon. So I wanted to make sure I had some way of like directing those people to the site. So in the lead up to that, I interviewed a bunch of content creators to dig into how they came up with their successful ideas and what they think makes them work. And I was kind of breaking that down. And so I ended up, the conversations I had with them, there was about, I can't remember how many, 9 people from 5 different agencies. They each shared with me stories of about 5 campaigns. So when I boiled it down into the talk, there was just so much more good stuff I got from them. I got the stories behind all of their successful, or 5 of their successful ideas, each of them. So there was so much good stuff. I felt like that I had to cut out for the talk that I ended up writing an ebook to go with it. I threw up a 1-page website, made the ebook downloadable. Then I gave the talk. And I was really glad I did it, actually, because I ended up with 200 or 300 people online at this conference, but they also started sharing it online. So I ended up with about 8,000 downloads of the ebook, sign-ups for the ebook. So yeah, it was worth launching. Wow. So it's kind of really a soft launch. I've been working away on the rest of the content and behind whilst also juggling client work. And I've turned some of those interviews into my own podcast, which I'll be starting next year. So it's kind of not fully launched, but it's coming.
I know that you are in either you're going to press the button to launch your new website or not. So have you crossed that bridge yet?
No, we're gonna do it in January. It's like everyone's winding down. I tell you what, so one of the reasons I wanted to launch this site, there's a bunch of reasons. One is that I am known within the SEO industry to an extent for coming up with these creative ideas and teaching people about it. But since I left the agency I worked with a few years ago, there isn't really anywhere where I collect my thoughts and my work and my insight. You can do workshops, you can work with me, but there's nothing public facing, and a few people had kind of nudged me on that saying, I'd love to hear more from you. I'd love to see more of your writing. And I always enjoyed that side of things. So I wanted to get back into it. And I wanted to create a site. When I started in SEO, the side of SEO that I'm mostly involved in is content creation, particularly for links when it comes to SEO. That side of it these days is sometimes getting referred to as digital PR. There was a period where it was referred to as content marketing. I don't really mind what people call it. But yeah, when I was starting out in that world, there really weren't many people that were good at this. I had to kind of figure it out for myself. I did get good at it, and I did kind of figure it out. I kind of wanted Content Hubble to be the site I wished I had been able to find when I was starting out. Like, where do I go to learn how to come up with these ideas and how to know whether these ideas are going to work? And there really isn't still, to my knowledge, a place that does that specifically for content where you're trying to get, that extra burst of attention in terms of links and shares and traffic. So I wanted to create that page, that site that people could go to and find that. I feel like I started on a slightly different thread and lost my track there, but maybe you can remind me.
No, this is good stuff.
It's good. Yeah, because I want to ask that what we have when we go online is, Content Hubble is a space to explore content ideas. And that sounds, that's a nice sort of sum up. But for anyone listening who thinks, oh, actually, I might want to get in the space, what can they expect from Content Hubble?
So a lot of it is, I and some of the people that I'm kind of close to in the SEO industry that are coming up with ideas that get shared a lot online. They get shared within the community as well as being shared by their audience. And a lot of times, you see these campaigns that are shared, but I'm always curious, how did they come up with the idea? Like, what was the process or what was the path they took to get there? And then what is it about this idea that makes it work? Now, all of that isn't necessarily evident when you look at it. A lot of times people are just sharing this stuff going, this is cool, but they don't really know what makes it work. So I really want, and there are a lot of sites that curate good content, and that is useful. That's a really useful resource for inspiration. But I want to kind of be the site where we break it down and I find out from the people that behind it, how did you come up with this idea? What are some of the habits and tools and processes you're using to continually come up with ideas? And then also dig into and go, why do we think this idea worked? And there's a lot that you can do by digging into the coverage and figuring out, what was it that the journalists saw in this? What did they write about? And also have frameworks for breaking down what makes a good idea. And so it's really it's that depth of insight. And I say the space because the space is meant to be a kind of double or triple meaning, if you like. And I run a lot of workshops about how to come up with content ideas. And people always ask me, how do you get into the creative space? And I think that means quite a few things. Like, I think you can set a physical space that you do your creative work away from your normal office. That can be as simple as the kitchen table, whatever it is. But I think we get into a certain mode of thinking and doing at our normal desk. And sometimes you need to step away when you're going to do some creative work. And it can be good to kind of indicate that to yourself, have some triggers about, right, I'm not in normal work mode now. I'm going to do a bit of creative work. And so setting up a physical space that's a little bit different, where you feel a little bit more energized, a little bit more creative. There's also the digital space side of things, which is really just about closing all the distractions down. There's one thing I've noticed. I really believe in taking some time to come up with ideas. And that can mean time going online, researching, wandering, going down the rabbit hole on the internet to see what's interesting in a certain area and coming up with ideas. But when I teach people to do that, often they say they feel a little bit guilty about taking taking that sort of time, because you don't always know where you're going to end up. It doesn't feel like the most productive time. And when they set aside time to do creative work, they often end up hopping back to their emails or hopping back to Slack, because they just kind of get a bit uncertain, and they feel a bit guilty that they're not being productive, and it feels productive to tick off 5 emails or a Slack message, and then you get that little dopamine rush. So I have to kind of encourage them to set their digital space, and then obviously there's getting in the actual creative headspace itself as well. And so kind of there's a few different ways of thinking of the space for creative ideas, but also I just want Content Hubble to be a space where you can go to really explore the ideas, to dig into them, and to get inspiration, but also a lot of insight. And I think insight is often lacking from a lot of places that talk about this stuff online. So that's kind of what I'm aiming to do there.
The first thing people see when they go on your LinkedIn page is your epic presentation, which you created a few years back, titled How to Produce Better Content Ideas, which to date has had 4.1 million views. So it's gone truly viral. It's been viewed thousands and thousands of times. People have taken screenshots, loads of comments. How did that come about? Could you tell us a bit more about, it's an epic document. It sort of kind of encompasses everything. How did it come about, and how long did it take you to write that up?
Yeah, that was an interesting one. So one of the challenges or frustrations I had when I joined the SEO industry, I didn't have a background in this. And I kind of mentioned before that I wasn't able to find the site that could just teach me how to do this. I also wasn't really initially able to find the people in the SEO industry to teach me how to do this. This was like 9-10 years ago in SEO. I was going to a lot of conferences, which are very popular networking events, and great to learn tips from all the kind of industry thought leaders. But at that time, the idea of making this kind of bigger content that got lots of attention was kind of new. Even content marketing itself was newish around that time. It was certainly picking up a lot of steam. And I was listening to people on stage talk about, hey, you should be making content, and they'd share examples of cool content. And this is almost what I meant about the insight. It took me a while to realize, these guys didn't actually make the stuff they're pointing to. So they can't really tell me how do you come up with those ideas. They're just saying you should come up with stuff like this. So the level of insight was lacking. And I realized it was lacking largely throughout the SEO industry. So I decided I needed to go somewhere else to find out from people. So I went and learned from people in advertising. I met this amazing advertising strategist, and I asked her all about how their creatives came up with ideas, how they decided which ideas were good, how they presented their ideas. And that was amazing. And it was interesting because this was around the time that people were like, advertising is dead. It's all about content. But I was thinking, you know what, like the advertising agencies have been coming up with creative ideas since the 50s and 60s. Like, I'm sure they could teach us a bunch of stuff about this. And that was brilliant. A lot of the content I make and the people I know are making it's kind of it's data-led, often data visualization, infographics, interactive graphics, partly because those visuals can be quite compelling and eye-catching, and they can get a lot of information across quickly, partly because data can make it very factual and newsworthy. They're kind of quite engaging, I guess. And also, if you're talking about building links, it's something that they have to reference if they're going to include an image. You get the attribution link, which I think is part of why it's there. So I went to learn from the data viz community. That's a community I'm probably easily as engaged with as the SEO community online and digital PR community. I love the data viz stuff, learning from people like Andy Kirk at Visualizing Data and David McCandless at Information is Beautiful. The stuff at Information is Beautiful and Information is Beautiful words is great examples of the types of content I like to make and have taken inspiration from. So yeah, we're going the long way around this. Yes. So I was asked, I got invited to speak at conferences, but because I'd been slightly early on in my career in SEO, but because I'd been slightly frustrated that people were talking about stuff they hadn't made and weren't able to give the real insight I was looking for, I vowed I was never going to get on stage until I had my own successful campaigns that I could point to and teach people how I came up with it. Because that's what I wanted from a speaker on stage. And I said I wouldn't do that until I could do that. Like I said, I'd spent time trying to figure this out. I started to have some success. We started to create some content, some of which went pretty viral itself. And so the CEO at Distilled, the agency I was working in, remembered what I had said. So he came across to me one day and said, right, so you're willing to get up on stage and talk about it now, right? And I couldn't really disagree because I had, made that statement. So I was going around asking the SEOs in the agency. By this time, I was kind of more I was the head of creative at the team. I built a small creative team, which I later built to be a bit bigger. But I was more in the creative side. I wasn't really an SEO, but I'd been invited to an SEO conference. So I went around asking the SEO consultants in the agency, if I was to speak, what would you want to know? And they all said, how do you come up with ideas? Like, how do you do it? I want to know how you do that, which is interesting because obviously that's what I'd spent time trying to figure out. And so I was sitting in the pub one day with a couple of my colleagues, and one of them said, so what are you going to talk about at this conference? It was a conference called Search Love in Boston. I think it was in 2014 now. And I said, well, I hadn't mentioned this to anyone, but I sort of hesitantly put out, well, I think I'm going to talk about how you come up with ideas. And my colleague said, you can't do that. Ideas just come to you, and that's it. You can't tell people how to come up with ideas. And I found that really interesting. And I also, essentially I felt like she was telling me I couldn't do that. And if anyone ever tells me I can't do something, I kind of react and like, oh, don't you tell me what I can't do. So I wanted to kind of prove her wrong. But I also think there is truth in that. There is truth that, ideas do sometimes just spring to mind. You have that light bulb moment. You're like, oh, I've got it. And so it's hard to say exactly how that happened. But I think that ignores everything you did that allowed you to come up with that. There was a lot of work and there was a lot of lead up before there was that little gap, and then the idea came to you. So I focus a lot more on that, the other stuff that you do that enables you to come up with the idea in the first place. I guess you take the Edison quote, then creativity is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. I think, I'm focusing on the 99% perspiration that allows those moments of inspiration to occur. So I think there was another part of your question about this, about the talk, but that's how I came to give the talk, at least.
I mean, it's 144 slides. How long did it actually take you to physically write this up?
Yeah, it took me about 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks. And I was working in the agency during the day, but I would go home and work quite late each night. I'd get up early each morning. I was really just going back through everything. I was going back through all the successful ideas we'd come up with. I was going back through my notes that I had in a few books that were quite pivotal. And I think I mentioned those books in the end, and I can mention them again. Yeah, and I was I remember actually there's a photo from it where I have like Post-it notes all over my wall at home, just trying to connect it all together and figure it out. I actually finished figuring it out at 4 a.m. the morning before the talk, where it finally all clicked into place. The talk was going to be good, but I knew there was something about the structure that hadn't quite clicked. And then at some point I felt it and I was like, oh, I've got something here. I really knew that. And I don't know if I've experienced, there's some talks since then I haven't quite felt the same about. They were good, but there was something about that clicked into place for me. It was, the talk itself was actually, it's a creative piece of work. It's an idea itself, or there's a few ideas in there about how I structure that. I was just trying to simplify how I come up with ideas and what I'd learned from both data viz and advertising. A lot of it is borrowed from advertising, but applied to our context. Also, the book is the name of this slide. The name of the talk is a little bit of a play on the name of a book called A Technique for Producing Ideas by James Webb Young, I think. He's an old ad exec. The book is tiny. It's like 36 pages long with big text. It's pretty much the best book written on creativity. It's tiny. It's like you could read it in probably an hour. But that was very inspirational to me and influential. So there's definitely a large influence of that in there. And I've even borrowed from the title a bit too. So it probably took me about 4 weeks total, and I really pushed it right to the edge. I mean, when I got off stage, I was absolutely exhausted. I think there was a party. Yeah, there was a party straight after it, and I fell asleep in the bar almost immediately. Just went there, fell asleep in the bar, and then I had to leave because the barman wasn't happy about it. And and he thought I was drunk, but I was just tired. I can't stay awake.
Yeah, you dropped the mic and
then into raising that one.
Just one follow-up question, Mark. So you did the talk, and I guess you shared it on SlideShare. How did it pick up traction? How did you feel when it started hitting serious numbers in terms of 100,000 views, 200, and you hit your million, and then...
So that's an interesting one as well. I don't like presenting slides with lots of text on them. you're sitting somewhere and somebody's got all their bullet points on their slides and they're just like they're speaking notes. And I'm like, why am I looking at your note? These slides are there to help you, not to help me. So if you look at that deck, it might actually look like that, but that's not the deck I presented. The deck I presented just more or less had images on it and the odd word. So even though I had just finished like pushing myself to get this talk, I then spent another, I think it was 3 to 4 days turning it into the deck that, because my deck that I presented would have been largely useless to somebody online because it was like just images with very little text. So I had to then go and transform it into a separate deck that somebody could read and follow along with. So I spent a few more days doing that, but I haven't always done that, but I felt with this one, I just felt at the time that there was something special about this, that I made some breakthroughs that were helpful to me and I thought would be helpful to others. So I pushed for that, and then I shared it with I just shared it with some of my colleagues or something. I can't remember. I mean, there would have been a few people following the event, but the hashtag from the event had probably died down. But yeah, just a few friends and influencers in the industry that shared it. It ended up getting once I launched it, it got straight to the top of SlideShare that day. I don't have any magic tricks for that. Just the fact that people were sharing it and visiting it was part of it. And then in terms of the views, it's also been embedded in a few pretty big sites. It's been embedded on Moz, it's been embedded on Distilled site, it's been embedded in, there's a page on HubSpot. It was embedded in because somebody at HubSpot contacted me after seeing this deck go viral and asked me to come and speak at their conference. They posted this on their site. It used to be, I don't think this is the case anymore, but if you Google best PowerPoint presentation, that HubSpot page comes up number one, and then at the top of that page is my deck. Wow. So that sounds like killer SEO on my behalf, but I was just lucky. I had nothing to do with that. And HubSpot's obviously a hugely powerful site. Yeah, so that's some of the reasons. And also, actually, I get contacted. I had an email this year. I get contacted to this day. Now, this deck is now 6 years old, but more than one person this year, and it happens every year, has contacted me and said, I still reference this deck. They still find it as fresh and insightful today. I think some of the stuff in it is quite a sort of timeless approach as opposed to something that's about a current tactic. It's what I kind of tend to focus on. I think there's a lot of focus in content marketing about maybe the latest platform and little tricks, like I got to the top of SlideShare, it landed on this page that it ranks really well for. And yes, there are some tactics you can do, but fundamentally at heart, it's about having a really good idea that really speaks to people and that makes them want to share it. And then the tactics are just kind of icing on the cake if you do it that way. But if you really just focus on the tactics and you don't have the core idea as strong as it can be, then it's always going to be a bit of a struggle. And people are looking for the next tactic because the last one doesn't work anymore. And I'm like, well, I think it might be the fundamentals that are missing.
Yeah. The way tech is moving, is always something hot and something new. You look at, how House Party lived and died very quickly in lockdown. And I'm sure people already had ideas around how they were going to use it, how they were going to utilize it. And it sort of, really very quickly came and went, which is interesting to watch just from a marketing perspective. And I think right now, a lot of people have their eyes on, Clubhouse, and you think, well, this is, it's up to the users to show up. And if people get bored of it, what then? Building your ideas around a platform isn't a really sustainable way to look at.
Wait, for the ignorant, what is Clubhouse? Ignorant and non-millennials and non-Gen Z.
So Clubhouse it's only available to Apple users at the moment. So I don't even have it because I'm an Android gal. It was pegged as a project management tool for business, however, has been hijacked by the masses. And you see sort of celebrities, influencers, and everyday people are able to go into rooms together and have conversations about anything. So you can schedule a talk. So it's like having a conference and 600 random people turn up, and you can talk about anything from financial wellness to, dating to, they're some very mundane questions are very, they're very clickbaity. And then there's spaces where you can be talking about, startup culture or financial wellness or even health and lifestyle. So it's become a sort of global space for people to meet and have conversation. So neither of you have heard about this or seen
I
it?
personally haven't.
No.
Mark, I think I wanted to ask you, one of the misconceptions people have about content creation, I think because of, influencers and Instagrammers, content creation is just you make sure the picture is really nice, or it's just, one person, an influencer taking pictures, and because they have a large following, it gets to where it needs to get to. Now, as someone who's built teams, that are designed to create content, and this is at Distilled, which you mentioned, what do you look for when, or what did you look for when building this team? What do you look for? What are the elements you need to bring together to really think, okay, I have a team that can do work at the level that I think content creation should be executed at?
Interesting. So you mean in terms of like hiring the team, what I look for there?
Yeah, hiring, yeah.
So, I mean, the team at Distill, just to give you a bit of an overview, what was it made up of? There was me and a couple of other creative leads, people that were sort of acting as the creative director on their relevant projects. We had a data journalist, 3 designers, 2 developers, a project manager, and then we had a bunch of people working in outreach or digital PR. I feel like that covers most of it. I wonder if I'm forgetting it. We had one person in video, but we didn't actually do a lot of video work, to be honest. She kind of managed herself and did her own thing. In terms of hiring, particularly with the designers, I was looking for people that, you get this quite a lot with designers, so it's quite helpful, but looking for people that really, they do their own projects, they're just interested in design for its own sake. It was a similar thing with the videographer. And so they're kind of driven and curious, and they kind of love what they do enough to be pushing themselves to learn new things. And so they had lots of examples of their work that they had just done for its own sake. And I guess that's kind of true of younger designers, particularly who are coming out of university. That tends to be something that they do earlier in their career. I'm looking for that kind of hunger, but also evidence that they kind of push themselves to try different things. You're kind of always looking for curiosity, essentially. And then with the team, I'm looking for people that kind of push themselves to be better and who are open to feedback. It's pretty tricky. And, when you come up with an idea, and every part of it is an idea, right? The design is an idea. The way we develop it is an idea. There's going to be you're going to get a lot of feedback from a lot of different people in the I always feel for designers particularly, because their work is so visible that they get so much feedback from everyone and anyone, across our company, across the client company. And it must be pretty hard to take, but you need them to be able to take feedback well. I'm just looking for people that are willing to learn and grow, and those are kind of the critical things. People that are self-driven and enjoy what they do. So that's kind of what I look for within the team. When it comes to the idea side of things, really you kind of want to spend your time figuring out what is popular here. There's a bunch of tools you can use to find out what's popular in a certain topic area. You could go. I use BuzzSumo all the time, where I'll go on and so I might have. For an example, I went on to look at what's popular in cars and automotive, and then really quickly realized that some of the hot topics at the time, and still are to be honest, like electric vehicles, I guess carbon emissions, Elon Musk, and there's probably some other things. So I'll then drill down into them, go really deep and go, okay, in BuzzSumo it lists articles that have the most engagement. So you get a sense of the different types of topics and subtopics within that and what gets the most engagement. For example, there were articles coming up about, when it comes to CO2 emissions, that certain countries have made a commitment that there'll be no diesel cars on their roads by this time, and then there'll be no petrol cars on their roads by this time. And those sorts of things get a lot of engagement. So you might begin to get a sense of a very detailed aspect of this topic that gets engagement. But then I want to think about, but what haven't they told me, or how could they present this information in a way that would allow me to see something that I can't currently see? There's a quote that says, innovation is doing different things or doing things differently. I think with, a lot of because I'm presenting information visually, it gets called data visualization or infographics. I slightly prefer the term information design, though it doesn't get used as often. But with that, I think we're either presenting new information or we're presenting information in a new way that allows them that brings it to life in some way that allows that people to see it. So whenever I'm finding information, so one example, let's say in that example of the cities that are making pledges of when they will be diesel free, when they will be petrol free. I think some of them are even trying to make pledges about when they'll be carbon neutral. Once I start reading articles like that, I'm like, oh, is there anywhere where I can quickly see all the different cities and countries that have made these pledges and which year they plan to do it by. I'd really like to be able to see that to get a really quick overview so that I can understand the whole thing. If somebody hasn't made that, maybe there's an opportunity there. Or I guess maybe a question somebody hadn't asked is, what is the predicted net impact of all these commitments? Can we see, how much do they have to reduce? And then how much might that reduce global CO2? And then what else needs to happen beyond that? So there might be some information that people haven't gathered. I think one of the challenges with content is often that people see stuff that's successful and just copy it. To be honest, that can work quite well. And if you're not having any success, it's not a bad place to start. But then the next thing is really like, what haven't they done? What is the next thing? Is there a way we can show this information that makes it easier to understand and to grasp? Or is there a question they haven't answered that you could answer? That's kind of what I look for. So really it comes down to curiosity. I think curiosity is a huge part of creativity. Is looking for, like, you see something and you ask maybe, how did they come up with this, or how does this work, and what else would I like to know, or what else could I do with this? You talk about a lot of people talk about creativity being like play and being like a child. And, with that, I think there's something that sometimes misinterpreted as like creatives are just wacky and do whatever, wear funny clothing. And you see the picture of the room, the creatives sitting in Mad Men, and it looks like a play school. And I'm not really sure that's the point. When kids are really young and they get given a present at Christmas time, since we're coming up to Christmas, parents will always talk about the fact that they're often more fascinated by the wrapping or the box than they are by the present. And with the box, they'll taste it, they'll stick it in their mouth, they'll see if they can tear it, they'll get inside it, they might put it on their head. They're just thinking, what is this thing, and what's it made up of, and what else can I do with it? Whereas an adult will, and that's what I think is meant by play. They're just, and that can lead to creativity. Whereas with an adult, quickly just that's a box, you put it aside and you don't give it a second thought. And I think that's this, so it's that kind of curiosity that you want to re-engage. So when you see something that's interesting, what else could you do with this? Or what else would I like to know? And you just kind of break it apart and play with it and see where you end up. So that's kind of the difference between, just seeing what other people are doing and then maybe seeing if you can take it a step further. And the influencer thing is interesting because you've got to understand that once you've got influence, you can get engagement for almost anything. And that won't work if you don't have that influence. Just for a laugh, my old CEO at Distilled in the lead up to a conference copied some Lady Gaga quotes and tweeted them. And it might just be something like, something about dreaming big or something. And, she tweeted it and got 4,500 likes or maybe more, and he tweeted it and got 1. And it's quite a stark difference. Like at one point, I wanted to look at the most popular photos on Instagram to find out what's popular, and there was a photo of one of the Kardashians, and she'd lay down on the floor and she'd turn the strands of her hair into love hearts. It must have taken ages. I don't know how she did it. And so she had all these love hearts in her hair all around her, and that was cool and beautiful. But like, even if you went and did that, you're not a Kardashian. You're not automatically going to get the same sort of engagement. So it's almost a bit false to watch what influencers are doing in some sense, because once you get there, things play out a bit differently. Like there's certain publications and certain influencers that just have a default level of engagement for anything they produce because people just automatically engage with it. So it can be quite misleading. I think it's more important to look at maybe the types of content and the substance of that people are doing, but then also think, where could you do something else? I see a lot of people trying to copy, like even I know a few people that work, say, they work in personal training. They're personal trainers or they run gyms or whatever, and they look at what other gyms are doing and think, right, we need to do this. And maybe it does help to some base level, but I'd always be looking about, well, what could you do that's a little bit different or a little bit more interesting or stands out a little bit?
I had a follow-up question to that, Mark. Do you think if Lady Gaga copied some of the tweets that your ex-CEO put up, would engagement?
That's a good question. They want to know why she was suddenly tweeting about data or Google spreadsheets or SEO or something.
It's like the audience, they expect a certain genre of stuff, content that you're going to create. My serious question was, in terms of ideas, is it better to be original, put something which is risky and not tried before, or try something which is a bit wacky, but still fits in with the kind of genre or the kind of box that people expect you to write about?
This is a question I get asked in a slightly different way quite often, where it's like, so there will be, I often work with teams who have found the format that works for them. And the challenge then is they get stuck in it. They keep putting it out, and they ask that question, like, how do we break it? They always call it the rut. Like, how do we break out of this rut that we're in? We've got into such a habit, and we know these work to an extent. And then, so anytime you've got to come up with an idea, you've got to consider the risk of, well, I know if I go with this, I can kind of guarantee a certain amount of success. And if I go with this new one, obviously I'm aiming for a chance of much higher success, but I've also got a chance of much lower success. And so how do you balance that up? And I think there's a few different ways you can approach that. One, if you're having no success, I would actually just look at what is being successful and see if you can try and emulate that enough to start getting some success. See if you can figure out what's making that work. And that's like a good first level to get to. If you're having none, borrow from what others are doing quite explicitly and see if you can at least get to that first level and be like, okay, right, we're having some success. How do we then take this to the next level from here? So which should you do? Yeah, but if you're already having some success, how do you balance that up? There's 2 or 3 different ways you can take it. One, you can take it, think of it like an investment portfolio. You know, and okay, you've got your steady performers and you might want to put a certain amount of your time and budget into these, and they're not going to give you maybe the highest rewards, but they're also not going to do nothing most of the time. So they're your safe. They're, in the investment analogy, they'd be like your bonds and low risk investments. And then, you know, maybe you take depending on your appetite for risk, you take a kind of separate proportion of your time and attention to go for those kind of bigger pieces. And obviously as well, like if you've got a kind of framework for determining what's likely to work, then it's not totally, you're not just taking this wild punt on something that's totally out there that isn't founded. So it can be a balancing act, or you go the opposite. You know, sometimes, you know what? These ones that are kind of working, sometimes they're kind of working, but not really. Like, you know, the level of engagement's not all that. And you might be better, almost like just breaking a habit. Like go cold turkey and go, right, no more, we're not doing this anymore. You've got to go out and come up with a fresh idea. I think part of the challenge there is, there's a quote, I think it's by Tony Robbins, who I don't normally quote, but he said, you know, nothing fails like success. That's like, once you've got a piece of success, you just keep trying to recreate it because it worked for you before. Whereas like perhaps one of my most creative periods was that period where I was struggling and nothing was working right at the beginning. And I was running around trying to figure things out. You know, one of the biggest, most successful pieces I did was this interactive animated graphic that mapped out the history of dance music. When I was about to launch that felt like a huge risk. And I had this moment where I thought, what if this doesn't work? And then I remembered that nothing else had worked anyway. So what did it matter? You know, there was no risk there. But once you have this kind of safety net, it's difficult to take that away. And so actually going cold turkey might be an option too, if the balanced approach isn't kind of working for you.
Wow.
One thing you mentioned repeatedly through the conversation is the idea of, you know, taking space to really do the research and do the work before, you know, you figure out how to execute on the idea you have, because it could be, I have the idea to do this, but what approach do I take? But you've also talked about, you know, people not really taking the time to do that because you prefer, you know, the trackable win than the research for yourself. And I think being, you know, in agency or working in office, sometimes you feel like I want to show that I'm producing, and research doesn't always seem like producing. How were you able to train yourself to trust the research process over, you know, the quick win? How are you able to say, I'm going to take the time out to do this? So I think a lot of marketeers need to understand that, how to get to that point of saying, I'm going to spend the 2-3 days it might take to get me to the idea, and trust that process without being, you know, afraid to do that work.
Yeah, brilliant question. That is, yeah, like I was mentioning with people feeling guilty that they haven't checked their emails or their Slack messages for like half an hour. I mean, one question I'd pose to everyone, and that, you know, and I'm not even that good at this myself, but like, how often in a week do you spend 2 hours of uninterrupted time working on anything, right? Like, we've all fallen so prey to emails and Slacks and WhatsApp and phones and whatever. That's crazy. Like, we're so scattered. I mean, I don't even know if I did that this week, you know, so it's almost like do as I say, not as I do. I fall off that bandwagon all the time. But I mean, there's plenty of productivity advice that would say, you know, the first 2-3 hours, just figure out your most important task and get up and do that uninterrupted. But we don't do it. So, you know, and all these apps, you know, are designed to be so easy that you never switch them off. You never log out. They always ping you. you? But yeah, I think that's a challenge. And I think you've got to appreciate that if you can tick off a task, by these things are all giving us dopamine rushes as well. Like, okay, oh, I got a message, cool. Somebody liked my thing, cool. Or when you reply to an email and you tick it off your to-do list, you get a little bit of dopamine. We're training ourselves not to focus. We're training ourselves to value immediate reward. And we feel strange if we don't get that for a short while. So we kind of need to break that. It's easiest if you do it first thing in the morning. So you take control of your day rather than whatever it is you happen to do if you opened up your emails and stuff. I encourage people to, if you are likely to worry about what you're not doing, I do this a lot actually. I spend time before I do the creative research looking through my to-do list, looking through my emails and going, right, is there anything I need to do within the next few hours, or am I okay to just leave this alone? And usually, of course, the answer is yes, of course I am. And if I'm not, I take care of it. And then I know that I have this time and I just remind myself of that. And I maybe have a pad of paper beside me to write down anything that springs to mind, because you will suddenly get all this, now that you take the space, you'll get all this stuff like, oh, I haven't done this thing. And you might go to jump online to do it and you just no, wait, write that down, put it aside, you can do that after. So there's that. I seem to be a fan of quotes, but there's a quote from J.R.R. Tolkien about it says, it's on the inside cover of Lord of the Rings, I think. It says, not all those who wander are lost. And I try to remind myself that you do almost just have to learn to trust the process. One of the things I've noticed that's quite useful is if you go into the research process thinking, what ideas can I come up with? I think for a lot of people that can be quite stressful, and that's when they sort of panic and reach for the nearest thing to hand, which is probably an idea you've already had, and you just kind of grab that and go, oh, here you go, I have an answer, I have an idea. I think what's more interesting is to go and do your research within a certain area. It helps to make it narrower than you think as well. So rather than doing everything in cars, maybe it's everything in electric vehicles. Maybe it's even smaller than that. Maybe it's emissions, or maybe it's electric vehicle charging points, or whatever it is. You go and really research that area so you can get a depth of knowledge. But the way you frame it is, I'm going to go out and find out what's interesting here. What do people engage with? And when I do engage with that, what questions do I have? I finished a workshop once and a guy actually, I think it was the lunch break. He sidled over to me and said, Mark, this creative stuff, isn't it just? And it was funny. As soon as he said that and he left it hanging, I was instantly like bracing myself, feeling I was about to be offended for how he was going to like reduce my whole course down to something. But he said, isn't it just engaging with the topic and being curious? I thought about it and it's really stuck with me. I was like, yeah, I think it is. Sometimes thinking of it as being creative. I still haven't figured out all of this, and I'm not sure I will or anyone will, but I feel like we have weird hang-ups about creativity. You know, we think about creativity in a way we don't think about other skills. Like you hear people all the time go, no, I'm not very creative, but you would never hear someone go, oh, I'm not very logical. You know, you would never say that. But I just think, why do we have this strange relationship with creativity? I think if you set people the challenge of being creative or come up with ideas, I think there'd be a bit of like, oh, but I think it's easier to engage with curiosity and go out. Okay, your aim is to find out, what are people interested in? What do you find interesting? And what else would you like to know? That can be a much easier guide than, hey, you've got to go out and you've got to come up with ideas. I think people kind of get a little bit more panicky and just reach for whatever they can think of. I also encourage the research side of things. Actually, I should put one caveat. If you're working in the same industry day in, day out, if you're genuinely like a little bit of an expert in your industry, particularly if you're client side, I mean, it's still useful to do research, but you may well be able to come up with quite a lot of ideas yourself because you're immersed in this world, you know it. The same also applies if you, like, say your agency side, but you have to come up with ideas around travel or food or something that we can all relate to. We're all sort of experts in some way. We've all experienced that. So you could probably come up with some ideas. There's still value in going out and researching and finding these other things that you haven't thought of. But particularly on agency side, if you're jumping about into areas that you know next to nothing about, then you really need to do the research. My concern when people think about creativity and brainstorming, they always use that word. I'm not sure I like that word, but you know, I just immediately think, what you mean 6 people get into a room and assume that you have everything you already need inside your head to be able to come up with a good idea. Like, I feel like that's likely to result in a bit of shallowness. You know, like if you're not an expert, go out and find out what is important. And it's always the things that catch your attention by surprise. You know, there's a lot of kind of serendipity to creativity, and the way you manufacture that is by exploring more. And actually, one of the other things I've noticed about people that are particularly creative and good at coming up with these ideas is they're kind of consuming content and other creative ideas all the time. They're not waiting till, oh, I need an idea. Right. Okay, I'll go into the room for an hour and I'll come up with an idea. They're exposing themselves to creative content all the time. And they do that thing I was talking about. They look at it and they think, oh, that's cool. I wonder how they came up with that, and break it down. What is it that they've done? How does this work? What else could they have done with this? Or if I made this, how might I have done it differently? So they're doing it all the time. And whether that leads to ideas or whether that's just good practice. And a talk I did recently, earlier this year, Outreach, that we mentioned, I compared it to, say, like Mike Tyson, the world's greatest boxer. He trained all the time, right? And he also, he didn't step into the ring on match day and go, oh God, I hope I'm still good at boxing. I haven't boxed since the last time. He's training all the time. He's practicing moves. He's doing the things he needs to do to be good so that when it matters, like the game is won before he even steps in the ring practically. The reason I picked him, actually, funnily enough, I know in some senses, certainly historically, he's quite a controversial character, but he's definitely also was like one of the best in his field. I saw him interviewed on the Joe Rogan podcast, and he had asked him which boxers he studied, which boxers he was inspired by, and he said all of them. He's like, I had this music, I had access to this library of videotapes of all the great boxers, and I studied them all. And so if you want to come up with creative content, one thing I'd be recommending is that you're finding people to follow that are sharing lots of great content, and you're studying that and you're breaking it down a bit, and you're thinking, how did they do this, and what makes it compelling, and how could I emulate this? That's kind of the equivalent in our world.
My last question, which ties in beautifully to your what you just finally said, is, are there any content creators right now that you're just loving what they're doing out?
That was my question.
You think even this year has just really done like really, really cool work, companies or personal?
I do tend to live in the world of data visualization and interactive graphics. That's kind of my forte. A lot of the principles I talk about does relate to other stuff. But within that world, I mean, they're not new. They've been great at it for years. But there's a site called pudding.cool, which does amazingly cool stuff. They did stuff like which rapper has the largest vocabulary. They figured that out by analyzing all their lyrics. They did a piece on what are the odds of becoming a successful band. They studied how many bands play in really small venues in New York. And of all those bands, 7 years later, how many made it to playing in a stadium? And I think they went from something like 14,000 bands to 12. Like how they answered questions, even think about those questions, then answering them is just genius. They do so much cool stuff. And then I always pay attention. And the New York Times graphics team is pretty much the best in the world at this stuff. If you want to see a range of stuff, though, there's a Twitter handle called Digital PR Examples, which is kind of run and owned by Carrie Rose from Rise at 7. They themselves have been doing a lot of cool stuff online. I always follow the work of a team called Verve Search. There's teams from AIRA, AIRA. I follow teams from Neomam, plenty others. There's going to be others I'm going to wish I'd said, but those are certainly some of the ones that, Digital Loft as well. And those are the people that I interviewed for that ebook. They all came from those agencies. And there's other agencies doing good work for sure. Actually, the Digital PR Examples Twitter handle shares loads of their stuff. But it's also like, if you do work in digital PR, try to look outside of that field as well. That's how you come up with original stuff, like the stuff they're doing in data viz, or maybe the stuff they're doing in advertising or whatever.
You studied actuarial science. And for the keen-eyed listener or the keen-eyed viewer, you are originally from Scotland.
That is true, yes.
Do you think what you studied at university influences what you do to date?
Not massively, other than I'm comfortable dealing with numbers. I've forgotten virtually everything I learned at university. It was a long time ago now. But when I am dealing with the data journalist, Volodymyr Kuprianov, or Volcup, as he's known online, or VK as I refer to him, when I'm working with him, I know about enough to be able to communicate with him. And as a creative director, I've kind of had that with all of the people I work with. I know just about enough to chat to a designer, just about enough to chat to a developer. I guess being comfortable with numbers, but beyond that, no, it wasn't a great choice. I don't have many regrets in my life, but my choice of university course is probably one of the biggest. It was very boring, and I wish I'd studied something more interesting.
Yeah, I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and we were saying, okay, decisions that you make as a teenager on what you're going to study at uni kind of remains with you for the first very influential part of your career, or especially when you start getting into your first job. How can people find you, and how can people get in contact with you?
I mean, if they're interested in the ebook where I interviewed 31 people about successful content campaigns, how they came up with them, what made them work, they can go to Content Hubble, HUBBLE.com, and they can sign up and get that. And then they'll be part of the email list, and they'll hear whatever else I'm up to. Who knows, by the time they do that, by the time this goes live, maybe my site will be, I don't know when this goes out. On Twitter, I'm Epic Graphic. That's kind of really harks back to my days in the data visualization community, and I've just never changed it. I'm also active on LinkedIn, but I can't remember how you contact me on there. Maybe there'll be a link somewhere that you'll share. They don't make the sharing as easy on LinkedIn as they do on Twitter.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Yeah,
right.
Thank you so much.
You guys.
Hope you enjoyed this episode, and don't forget to listen to other episodes of Zero Calorie Marketing podcast.
If you have a minute, do leave us a review on whichever platform you happen to be enjoying this episode.
We'd love to hear from our listeners, so drop us a message with guest suggestions, thoughts on the episodes, and even compliments at zcm@interestingcontent.co.uk.